Alright guys and girls, this is jerningham here, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I was filming this video about the 300,000 Russian troops, and the video stopped. I do apologise. Let's put it back on again. That's what it's been saying. The other video's uploading.
Where Putin is saying, if you violate Russia's territorial integrity, then there very well may be a nuclear response, not bluffing. How serious do you take that, especially in conjunction now with these referenda, where you have those areas that you have shaded right there, which will very likely vote, albeit in a bit of a sham vote, to join Russia within the next week?
That's right, John. So this area, these areas right here that we're looking at, these are the areas. There are four of them, to include the Donbass region, as well as areas that they've captured as part of this land bridge. These are the areas from Kherson all the way up to the north in the Luhansk area. They are going to be the ones that are going to be voting on these referenda. When Putin made the statement that he's going to protect Russian territory, he means he's going to protect this part in addition to all of this, the large expanse of the Russian landmass. So when he's doing that, he is saying, this is mine. NATO's reaction to this is not going to be favorable, and the risk of escalation as a result of that, John, is going to be
NATO could probably shoot out them.
Colonel Cedric Layton, great to have you on this morning. Thank you so much for letting us see where all this is happening.
Well, there we are, guys and girls and ladies and gentlemen.
Start your free trial of Crime and Investigation Play, the only dedicated crime streaming service that brings you closer to every story and deeper into every case. There's no better motive to start watching now.
Who knows what's going to happen? We're going to get worse. Could it get better? Just have to wait and see, won't we? So we can do.
Welcome to the US Daily Brief channel. The world stated today with the last-minute shocking news from Russia. Seismic radars cannot measure the intensity of the revolution earthquake in Moscow. Angry Russians are uniting against Putin's regime and the senseless war in Ukraine and expressing their anger to the world. Russian President Vladimir Putin, who started a military operation against Ukraine on February 24, announced that he had declared a partial mobilization. Defending that the West wants to destroy Russia, Putin again brought the nuclear weapons card to the table. The Moscow administration is declaring military mobilization for the first time since World War II. The consequences of this move by Putin were heavy. Russian cities are boiling like a wet cauldron. All streets of the Russian cities began to shine with anti-war protests. Clashes are taking place with Russian police. Angry Russians attack government buildings and set fire to Molotov cocktails. After partial mobilization was declared in Russia, the Vesna movement called All Russia Protest Action. Allies of jailed opposition figure Alexei Navalny also urged the Russians to participate in the street demonstrations and also express their support for any protest, including the burning of conscription offices. In response, the Kremlin's leading propagandist, Vladimir Solovyov, shared a post outlining measures against illegal rallies. Solovyov stated that all participants in these rallies will be transferred to the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs after being detained and then enlisted in the military. The military service category will be determined with the participation of the representatives of the military service branch. Those who do not immediately fit into the first category are among the explanations to be registered for the next military service. After Russian leader Putin's address to the nation, the declaration of mobilization caused panic in the people of the country and the people took to the streets. It was announced that more than 1,300 people were detained in the demonstrations attended by hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens, and 394 of those detained were arrested in Moscow. Security forces used force against some people who attended the rallies. Petersburg, 40 in Yekaterinburg, 23 in Perm, 22 in Ufa, 19 in Krasnoyarsk, 20 in Chelyabinsk, 19 in Krasnoyarsk, 14 each in Vorozhne and Krasnodar. In Kaliningrad, 10 protesters each and 10 each in Kaliningrad. There are about 10 detainees in Saratov and other cities. Street musicians in Izhevsk and a woman in Kaliningrad were arrested for wearing a blue
Right, got advert coming on. I'll change the advert over to like New York City.
And yellow striped jacket. St. Petersburg Police Station. Information came that law enforcement officers tortured detainees by not allowing them to use the toilet. A wave of protests swept through Russia in this afternoon, facing rallies in the Far East and Siberia. In Moscow, police began detaining protesters soon after the march began. Participants tried to form a chain at the beginning of Arbat Street in the city center. Some of the protesters chanted, "Life to our children," and put Putin in the trenches. Law enforcement in the area began to arrest people. As one of the detainees told the OVC knowledge portal, more than 10 people were put in rice wagons. One of the demonstrators fainted while being detained. Among others, women whose sons are now on conscription age joined the protests. St. Petersburg, about 50 protesters Isaac's Cathedral. The protesters chanted "No war" and "No mobilization." The participants were surrounded by the police. According to OVC info, protesters were beaten with batons while being detained. People are also arrested in Yekaterinburg, Vladimir, Tver, and other cities. In a speech broadcast on television the day before, Russian President Putin said, "The West wants to destroy our country. The West wants to feed the Ukrainians into the tanks. In this historic Ukrainian region, do not want to live under neo-Nazi control. We don't have the right to give up on these people," he said. While Putin expressed their support for the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk, he said that they were ready to use all kinds of weapons for Russia's territorial integrity. Putin also stated that Moscow will spend more on weapons production. The Russian leader said, "The orders are in direction of partial military mobilization and the decision has been signed. Our actions in the direction of military mobilization began today." Openly threatening the West, Vladimir Putin said, "I say to the West, we have many weapons to respond to,
always good to
and
be
this
there
is
for
not a
somebody.
bluff.
Some people don't have that.
We will use all our resources to defend our people." Putin also stated that his aim is to liberate the Donbas region in the eastern Ukraine and that they support the independence decisions of the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions. Russian Defense Minister Shoigu, speaking to the Russian television about the partial military mobilization announced by President Vladimir Putin, "We are fighting the West in Ukraine. Western commanders are conducting their weapons from Kiev. The West is attacking civilians. The entire satellite network of NATO is working against Russia in Ukraine," he said. About the announced partial mobilization, Defense Minister Shoigu said, "The mobilization is valid for those with previous military experience and those who have performed military service. There will be no mobilization call for those who are already soldiers or students. We have huge resources, and thanks to these resources, even 1% of our 25 million citizens." He said that 300,000 additional officers will be called to serve in Russia's military operation in Ukraine. Just as Putin's partial mobilization statement resonated in the country, it had a lot of repercussions in the West, including nuclear powers, that if Russia felt that its territorial integrity was under threat, it would use all defense methods at his disposal. Putin, he was ready to respond to what he described as the nuclear blackmail of the West. He challenged, saying it was not a bluff. The US ambassador to Ukraine described Putin's statement as a sign of Russia's failure. Bridget A. Brinks said that the USA will never recognize Russia's claim to annex the so-called Ukrainian lands, and we will continue to stand by Ukraine no matter how long it takes. President Putin's failure to keep his promise not to mobilize part of his population and illegally annexing parts of Ukraine, his invasion failed. Partial mobilization could provide the Russian army with about 300,000
long video,
soldiers.
isn't it, guys and girls, ladies and boys and girls?
Is not as clear-cut as
Halfway
it
through it all.
seems, and it will take few weeks and months for new troops to come to the force. On the other hand, this shows that Moscow is involved in the long run and will not hesitate to prolong the war. But on the other hand, it is a sign that the Russian army will remain on the defensive strategically. Simply put, the partial mobilization Putin seeks will not give the Russian military a significant battlefield advantage anytime soon. Putin and the defense minister do not hesitate to send tens of thousands of their citizens to their deaths. No threats and propaganda can hide the fact that Ukraine has won this war. The international community is united and Russia has become a global pariah. Also, Putin announced the extensions of contracts for Russian professional contract soldiers. This extension is likely to backfire in Moscow. The morale of these troops was already low, and any unilateral extension of their service in a war zone would adversely affect their effectiveness. An unproductive union that does not believe in the cause and has to fight cannot save Russia. Putin is making a strong statement to the Russian people and the world as the last struggle in the swamp he has entered. Even nuclear blackmail came into play. We are talking about not only about the bombing of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, promoted by the West and threatened with nuclear disaster, but also the statements of some high-level representatives of the leading NATO countries on the possibility and acceptability of the use of mass weapons. But
twice it's done that. I don't know why it's done it, but there we go. Don't know if you guys or girls have problems with your TV going on and off, ladies and gentlemen, but it's annoying.
Putin's statements are unfounded. At the end of this war, led by Putin, Russia risked not only its own borders, but also Russia's entire environment. As it is known, Russia does not have a single neighbor that has not been victimized throughout its history. It is now concerned by the war with Ukraine. The situation is dangerous, but the defeat of Russia is one of its reasons. The West's current task should not be to not allow Putin to take victory from the grip of defeat and to limit collateral damage. It seems possible to predict what Putin, whose last struggles we have seen, will do not cover up his weakness. If you want to follow the hot developments closely, do not forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching us.
Granny. Yeah, it's very interesting, that was.
I got the...
Interesting video indeed, that was. Watching more adverts on the TV. Dettol adverts.
Trust Dettol to let life flow.
The Dettol adverts. See? Keep your house tidy.
Russia's military is divided over how best to counter Ukraine's unexpected battlefield advances this month, according to multiple sources familiar with U.S. intelligence, as Moscow has found itself on the defensive in both the east and the south. Russian President Vladimir Putin is himself giving directions directly to generals in the field. Two sources familiar with U.S. and Western intelligence said a highly unusual management tactic in a modern military that these sources said hints at the dysfunctional command structure that has plagued Russia's war from the beginning. Intelligence intercepts have captured Russian officers arguing among themselves and complaining to friends and relatives back home about decision-making from Moscow, one of these sources told CNN. And there are significant disagreements on strategy, with military leaders struggling to agree on where to focus their efforts to shore up defensive lines, multiple sources familiar with U.S. intelligence said. The Russian Ministry of Defense has claimed that it is redeploying forces toward Kharkiv in the northeast, where Ukraine has made the most dramatic gains, but U.S. and Western sources say the bulk of Russian troops still remain in the south, where Ukraine has also mounted offensive operations around Kherson. Putin announced a partial mobilization on Wednesday that is expected to include the call-up of up to 300,000 reservists. He has for months resisted taking that step, and Biden administration officials said Wednesday that the fact he has moved to do so now highlights the severity of Russia's manpower shortages and signals a growing desperation. It's not clear that the mobilization will make any operational difference on the battlefield, or merely prolong the length of the war without changing the outcome, according to Russian military analysts. And while Russia flails on the battlefield, officials in Moscow have scrambled to assign blame for Russia's abrupt turn in fortunes, a senior NATO official said. Kremlin officials and state media pundits have been feverishly discussing the reasons for the failure in Kharkiv, and in typical fashion, the Kremlin seems to be attempting to deflect the blame away from Putin and onto the Russian military, this person said. Already, there has been a reshuffling of military leadership in response to the battlefield failures, leaving Russia's command structure even more jumbled than it was before, sources say. The commander who oversaw the majority of the units around the Kharkiv region had been in the post only 15 days and has now been relieved of duty, the NATO official said. Russia has sent a small number of troops into eastern Ukraine, some of whom had fled amid Ukraine's battlefield advances last week, according to two U.S. defense officials, an effort to shore up its weakened defensive lines. But even if Russia is able to coalesce around a plan, U.S. and Western officials believe Russia is limited in its ability to mount a strategically significant response to Ukraine's counteroffensive operations that in recent days, sources say, has swung the momentum in Kyiv's favor. Even after the announcement of the partial mobilization, officials are skeptical that Russia is capable of quickly deploying large numbers of troops into Ukraine given its ongoing problems with supply lines, communications and morale. The small scale of the Russian redeployment is a signal of its inability to mount any serious operations, the senior defense official told CNN. Absent more manpower that, right now, it simply doesn't have, sources said Russia has few other options to penalize or push back Ukrainian forces. Putin is struggling, National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications John Kirby said in an appearance on CNN on Wednesday. Russia's military has poor unit cohesion, desertions in the ranks, soldiers not wanting to fight, Kirby said. He has terrible morale, unit cohesion on the battlefield, command and control has still not been solved. He's got desertion problems and he's forcing the wounded back into the fight. So clearly, manpower is a problem for him, Kirby said. He feels like he's on his back foot, particularly in that northeast area of the Donbass. And mobilization order is a clear sign Putin's plan isn't working.
See, the PS4 thinks we're speaking to it. See?
Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you
interesting, that, innit? But anyway, guys, girls, ladies, at the end of the video. Thank you for all joining me, and I'll do some more videos later. See you in the next one. Take it easy. Peace. See you later.